So let's just do some quick final adjustments. If you're here, hello, give me a wave. If you see me glancing down here, it's I have my laptop down here so I can keep an eye on the proceedings a little bit closer than I can just on my phone. Very, very weird setup that I have here. Let's just do a couple of quick adjustments. There we go. Okay, wonderful. Okay, everyone. So, hello. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. Give me a wave if you're here. Drop me a comment. It's so nice to see you here. Thank you so much. And just, oh, I'm in such a good mood. It's release day. It's release day. Oh, I can't believe it. I can't believe it. It's hard to believe that the first book released just 6 months ago, that has flown so much, and now volume 2's out, and I know it sounds like I'm blabbering, but I'm really just at a loss for words, because this story has been with me for so long, literally over 10 years. I will talk a little bit about how it all came to be and everything a little bit later, but basically just to give you guys a rundown of what is going to be happening in this stream. So I'm going to be, if you have any questions for me, drop them. I will answer them if I see them. I'm just going to be keeping an eye on the proceedings down here. I'm also going to be talking a little bit about sort of the behind the scenes stuff, how the story came to be, various inspirations and stuff, just sharing all of that with you guys. 10 years worth of all of the stuff that came into creating this novel. And I am also going to be giving you a reading, exclusive reading from the book. So if you joined me for the live stream, which I hosted to celebrate the cover reveal, then you'll already have heard chapter 1 of volume 2. Today I'm going to be reading chapter 3. So jumping forward a little bit, I'm specifically reading chapter 3 because there is a massive reveal in chapter 2, and I don't want to necessarily give that away like here. So instead, I'm going to be reading you chapter 3. So, which has one of my favourite bits of verbal sparring in it, shall we say, between two characters in particular, Melissa and Phoebe. And if you guys have read volume 1, then not only do you know who those characters are, but you know exactly what I'm talking about when I say verbal sparring between those two. So, I'm going to get to that in just a second, but first of all, I just want to just give a heartfelt, genuine, sincere thank you to every single one of you out there, because this would not have been possible without you. You know, there is the support that you give me constantly, day in and day out. It absolutely staggers me, and I am so honoured to not only have such amazing readers, but to be able to share all of this with you. Not only that I am producing it, but that you are gladly taking it and you're enjoying it, enjoying reading it as much as I've enjoyed writing it. I often say that I could no sooner stop writing than stop breathing, and you guys give me that air, and I really mean that. I could not do this if it wasn't for your support, and I want to just tell you from the bottom of my heart how deeply I appreciate that. So thank you so much for making this possible, and I really hope that you will enjoy volume 2 as much as you've enjoyed volume 1, or if you haven't read volume 1, check it out. I really hope that you'll enjoy all of it. So now that so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to read you guys chapter 3 of Run Like Clockwork. So oh, thank you, Bernard, that's really sweet. Honestly, it does mean so much to me, really so much, and I'm just so touched really to know that my stories mean that much to other people, not just me. They all come from somewhere very deep inside me, so many things. So to share them with others and to know that they are appreciated by others, it's the greatest gift. It's the gift that keeps on giving. Thank you. Thank you. So I'm going to move on to chapter 3. So I'm just going to explain quickly in regards to how Run Like Clockwork is structured. It's split into 2 volumes, and that's because it is essentially just one massive story that had to be split into 2 novels. It is the same story, just over 2 novels. So because of that, the chapters in volume 2 are actually beginning at chapter 31. So it's chapter 1, but it's chapter 31 really, because it's just carrying on from where the first one left off. So this is chapter 33, but for ease, I'm going to refer to it as chapter 3. Here we go. A knock sounded on the door. Charlotte quickly wiped her eyes on her sleeve. "Who is it?" Malcolm called. "Oscar, is everything all right?" "Yeah," said Charlotte, hoping he hadn't heard the wobble in her voice. She cleared her throat, gave Malcolm a small smile, then stepped into the corridor. Oscar's eyes fleeted to her bandage, but to her relief, he didn't say anything about it. "Are you both all right?" he asked again. Malcolm nodded. "We will be, thank you." Charlotte frowned. The cloying heaviness had disappeared from the air. "Where's Leo?" "He's gone into the servants' quarters to keep out of sight," Oscar said. "Good," Malcolm said with a shudder. "I don't think I can look at him right now." "And I think he knows that," Oscar added in an undertone. "So what do we do now?" "We'll be safe here for the time being. Nobody saw us come in. And we can trust Phoebe. She's even more tired of the Eternum than I am." Oscar held out a hand. Too tired to protest, Charlotte took it and allowed him to lead her back into the parlour. Sure enough, Leo had disappeared. Aggie was alone, still huddled on the couch, twisting her fingers anxiously in her lap. Under a pale sunbeam, the bruise on her wrist looked like a stain of mud upon snow. Pity welled in Charlotte's chest as she settled beside her. Behind all those annoying smiles and free cakes, Aggie had been hiding her own darkness. "I'm sorry I ran off," Charlotte said. "Are you all right?" Aggie shook her head. "He lied," she said in a tiny voice. He said he didn't know you and Malcolm or about what happened to Father, but he did." "Who?" "The potentate. He told me I'd never have to grow up. This was what he meant, isn't it? So he could lock me in the tower." Malcolm squeezed Aggie's shoulder. "You're not going in the tower. You're staying with us." "Back to the watch shop?" Aggie asked. "To somewhere," Malcolm replied. He looked at Oscar. "Have you got any ideas?" Oscar massaged his temples with a weary groan. "Not yet, but I'm working on it. There won't be many places which are completely safe, not when things have been compromised this much." A horrid thought turned Charlotte's lungs to ice. "Will we even be able to go back?" she asked. Oscar hesitated. "I don't know." "Well, we'll figure something out," Phoebe called from the kitchen. "In the meantime, you should all eat something." She reappeared, carrying a platter. A pile of bread and butter was balanced on one end, and an ewer on the other. "Sorry it's not substantial. I'm not in the habit of having guests," she said. "Help yourselves. Now there's water. Not much, but the systems have stopped. We'll have to ration it. Unless anyone fancies wine? I've got loads of that." Malcolm raised his eyebrows. "I won't say no, actually." Phoebe sat the platter on a nearby table, then fetched a bottle. After handing Aggie some water, Charlotte accepted a glass with a grim smile. It was stronger than what she'd tasted in the past, but she didn't care. Thirst superseded it all. As they ate, Phoebe stripped out of her black dress and tossed it unceremoniously into the corner. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, fell into a chair, and swallowed her wine in 2 mouthfuls. Charlotte tried to hide her surprise, but Phoebe noticed and chuckled. "Your father used to look at me like that." "In all honesty, most people do until they get used to you," Oscar remarked. "Oh, you've seen nothing, Hargreaves," said Phoebe, pouring herself another glass. "This is mild compared to some of the stuff I've partaken in." Charlotte glanced at the discarded dress. It was the same one she remembered Phoebe wearing at her parents' funeral. At once, her stomach turned over. "Was it Evelyn Gilbert?" she asked. Phoebe's ears drooped. "Yeah." Oscar took a quick sip of his wine and stared out of the window. Charlotte did the same, suddenly grateful that it was a clear white and not a blood red. Now it made sense why Julian and Dr. Dickinson were in the area. They would have gone to the funeral too. She sighed. She should have been there. "She was an amazing teacher," Charlotte said, "and an amazing friend. I just wish—" "We all wish," Phoebe sighed. Her voice was so heavy and cool, it seemed to change the temperature of the room. She finished her wine again, then shrugged and drank straight from the bottle. "My lady," Malcolm said carefully, "forgive me, but you mentioned earlier that you couldn't die?" Phoebe snorted. "You want to know how old I am, do you? Older than our keeper friend, let's put it that way." Charlotte leaned forward. "Is it magic? I've never heard of anything like that." "I know you haven't. I suppose you could say it's magic. But luckily, not like the rest of the lunar fauna can use. Believe me, I wouldn't wish my longevity upon anyone." Phoebe ran a claw along the back of the chair until she found a loose thread and began toying with it. "It wasn't always like this," she said wistfully. "My people were free once, before the tower was built and the levels stacked on top of each other. I know it's all in the history books now, the collars, the slavery, but what they don't tell you is why it happened that way. Do you see why all the trees were cut down? Why all of my kind were trampled? Because the ancient magic is nature. Nature's power to constantly transform and change, and we are one with it. With us lunar fauna, nothing ever stays the same, and the No-Tails resented that. Better to have structure, they said. Better not to trust nature and rely on industry instead. The bloody idiots forgot we already live inside the most beautiful clock in existence. The sun tells the time, the moon tells the day, and the stars tell the month. But who can command that? No one. So first, the humans started getting power from running water, telling time with sundials. Then they figured out how pendulums and mainsprings worked, and there was no stopping them. The ancient magic was good enough to give alchemy a head start. But as for us, the ones who actually lived with magic in our veins, the shapeshifters, the moon gazers, we were animals, unworthy, nothing. So they'd need to keep us in check, always lower than them." Phoebe raised the bottle sardonically, then lifted her hind leg and scratched behind her ear. Charlotte, Aggie, and Malcolm stared at her, stunned. Only Oscar seemed unperturbed, but his eyes softened. Charlotte realized he would have been privy to this story before. Aggie's mouth fell open. "You mean you've seen trees? Actual trees?" Phoebe gave a pensive smile, the first genuine one Charlotte had seen since their arrival. "What were they like?" she asked. "Could they really grow as tall as this house?" "Some were even taller," said Phoebe. "Have you seen the plants in the glass houses under the artificial suns? They're all fake. Nothing grows like that naturally, all in straight lines. It's chaotic. The air was so fresh. You used every single inch of your lungs when you breathed. And no two trees were the same. The branches and roots twisted this way and that. What was in the sky was equal to what grew under the ground. Some were rough and others smooth, but they were all different. The imperfections was what made them perfect." Charlotte tried to picture it, the entire plain where forest stood covered by a real forest, stretching beyond the horizon in every direction. No streets, no levels, no tower. But even trying to visualize that much greenery was almost impossible. She could count on one hand the number of times she had even seen the pigment in clothes or in paper. It was the most expensive colour in the whole city, because it was so difficult to produce artificially. Phoebe drank again, gazing into nothingness. What I wouldn't give to see trees again, before fate is kind enough to let me go. Just one, just once. It sounds beautiful, said Aggie in wonder. It was, Phoebe agreed. You don't know what you're missing. Nobody does. I can't imagine what it must feel like to see all of that disappear, Malcolm said. It feels like crap, Phoebe said bluntly. I'd take the lunar fauna away from here if I could, give them the life they deserve. But there's nowhere else to go. Not for all of us, and I wouldn't leave anyone behind. And even if we did, I bet whoever's in charge of the Circulus would find a convenient excuse to follow. With a firing squad in tow, Charlotte said darkly. She fixed her eyes on the chandelier. A stream of gears surrounded it, and she envisioned them becoming larger, breaking free and pinning her to the ground. That was what had happened in Renee Square. After she was shot, a lighting mechanism fell across her. Such a simple thing which went wrong, but it shielded her from the rest of the bullets. It had meant the difference between life and death. Phoebe, listen, Charlotte said. I want to thank you for trying to help my father. If I'd have known back then, at the funeral, I would have told you. As would I, agreed Malcolm. Thank you, my lady. Thank you so much. Phoebe looked at them both as though seeing them for the first time. It's not often I hear those words from a human, she admitted. But you're very welcome. Julian threw his weight behind the well crank and pulled. It spun around, but only a few drops of water trickled out of the spout. His heart sank. He had been pumping for the past hour, drawing as much as he could, but now the system had finally failed. He turned to the lunar fauna in the square. Everyone looked as exhausted as he felt. That's it, he said apologetically. A worried murmur ran through the crowd. Julian against the wall and wiped the sweat off his spectacles. His entire upper body burned from turning the crank. It took all his resolve to not sink to the floor. Aunt Bridget handed the last bucket of water to a young spaniel, but she pushed it back. You have some, ma'am, she insisted. You both look real thirsty. Aunt Bridget glanced at Julian, but he shook his head. The canine, however, stepped close to him and held the bucket at his chin. Her tail wagged softly. Please, she said, it's the least I can offer. Julian sighed and took the smallest of sips. The water wasn't as pure as what he was used to, but he hardly cared. It was cold and flowed over his dry tongue like liquid silver. Only when Aunt Bridget had also drank did the canine take her leave. Another couple of lunar fauna approached with their buckets, but Aunt Bridget held up her hands to stop them. Please don't, she said firmly. You need it more than we do. Keep it for your families until this is all over. Julian put his glasses back on and glanced at the pale sky. He couldn't see the tower from this angle, but he didn't need to. He knew the hands would still be stuck at 5 minutes to 12. Were the artificial rivers empty now? Or had all the water just been directed to the top 3 levels, where the richest people lived? Aunt Bridget beckoned him. Come on, we've done all we can. Let's go to Phoebe. They walked out of the square. Luckily, his aunt seemed to know where she was going, so Julian trailed along behind and massaged his burning shoulders. His sweat chilled in the icy air and he started shivering. Never had he felt more desperate for a hot bath. When they reached Phoebe Street, Julian stared at the house in wonder. After the squalor he'd seen throughout Faunatown, it looked like a section of the potentate's pavilion had dropped onto the road. Even amid the scrappy front yard, it sang of grandeur. This was the kind of house Charlotte would have lived in a long time ago. Julian tried to visualize her there, but the image didn't seem right. Hair hidden under a wig, encased in a huge pastel dress. She didn't even talk like an aristocrat anymore. When Julian first met her 12 years ago, Her voice was clipped with perfect elocution, but that had rapidly disappeared. She had tried to fit in, so as to not draw attention to herself. Her name, she always insisted, was a target enough. Suddenly, sharp footsteps sounded on the cobbles behind them, heeled boots. Julian frowned. Lunafauna didn't wear boots. He looked over his shoulder. A troop of 7 constables were walking down the street. They were all humans save for one, a floppy-eared canine Lunafauna who was sniffing intently. Aunt Bridget pulled Julian aside to let them pass, but the oldest officer, a dark-haired woman, strode straight up to her. She looked exhausted, as though she had been out all night, but her eyes were so intense they might have been cut by razors. The hair on the back of Julian's neck stood up. Whoever she was, he didn't like her. "Good morning," the woman said politely, and produced a badge. "Chief Officer Melissa Spector." Aunt Bridget nodded once. "A pleasure." Spector smiled. "I believe I know you, don't I? It's Dr. Dickinson, isn't it?" "Yes, but I can't recall seeing you before. You have a look of your cousin." "With all due respect, I know I don't," said Aunt Bridget. Julian bit his tongue to keep himself from smirking. Spector's smile didn't drop, but her eyes took on a dangerous shine. "Doctor, you'll forgive me for what your business is here today. It's rather unusual to see humans in Fauna Town, especially ones as well-dressed as yourselves." "We came from a Lunafauna's funeral this morning," Aunt Bridget answered. "And since the power showed no signs of coming back on, we thought we'd lend a hand here. We would have needed to pass through anyway to reach the West Quarter. Speaking of which, perhaps you know what's happened to the tower." "A simple maintenance error, nothing more," replied Spector. "Don't be concerned, we'll have it fixed very soon." The door of Phoebe's house opened. "That's good to hear," she said loudly. "It will save me the headache of having to constantly reassure people." She leaned against the doorframe and turned her ears back. She had taken off her dress, but kept her bag, and the shawl was still around her neck, tighter than before. The sight of her made Julian's heart skip. Now all the fabric was gone, he saw the extent of her scars. The one on her chest horrified him. It was so deep and vicious. What could have made something like that? Spector turned to Phoebe. A flash of ice shot across her face. "Lady Feline, I'm glad you're home. I wanted to have a word with you, if you don't mind." The canine sniffed again, deeper this time. Phoebe didn't blink. "Bertie," she greeted. "Nice to see you." "And you, Phoebe," he replied. He wagged his tail, then Spector glared at him, and he stopped. Phoebe waved a paw at Julian. "Thank you so much for helping." "You know each other?" asked Spector. "Quit feigning ignorance, you know we do," Phoebe said sharply. "Now how long is this word going to take?" "Not long," Spector assured. "Where were you this morning?" "Burying a friend." "I'm sorry to hear that." Anyway, why are you here? I don't see any protests threatening to undermine you." "We're searching for some escaped criminals," Spector said. "They're connected to another unfortunate character who you were involved with once. Need I remind you what happened when he tried to run?" Phoebe's tail twitched. "I don't have the faintest idea what you're talking about." "You haven't seen anything out of the ordinary?" Spector pressed. "No humans?" "No more than I usually see. When did you lose them?" "Last night, just before the incident with the tower." "Ah. Well, if you want to check where I've been, Bridget can vouch for me being at the funeral. And the gravedigger. I only got back here an hour ago. As for last night, just speak to Anthony Holt at the Ringer Bells." Spector scoffed. "I would expect no less of you, my lady." "I aim to please," replied Phoebe, with the faintest hint of a sneer. She glanced at the canine again. "Well, Bertie, any smells I should be concerned about? You're sniffing harder than a kitten with a cold." Bertie hesitated, then shook his head. "No, Madam Spector, I can't pick up anything. My mistake. I think they must have gone down the other road. Spectre's hands curled into fists, but she relaxed just as quickly and tipped her cap. All right, she said. My apologies for the intrusion. It's fine, Phoebe said. Then she called to Julian. Why don't you two come inside? You look like a pair of icicles. Aunt Bridget grasped Julian's wrist and steered him along the path. Phoebe stood aside for long enough to let them through. They hurried into the parlour, and Julian angled himself so he could see through the window. Do you know her, Spectre? He asked. I know of her, replied Aunt Bridget. She's dangerous. Hope this is the only time either of us will see her. Would she hurt us? We're Dickinsons, so I'd hope not. But all the same, be careful. You didn't sound like you were being careful, Julian muttered. Don't confuse defensiveness with carelessness, Aunt Bridget said. I don't know what's going on, but if she's involved, it must be something substantial. Spectre said something to the other officers, and they sidled away, but she remained exactly where she was. Thank you for your cooperation. It makes for a pleasant change. I've got bigger fish than you to fry today, Vixen. While you're running around trying to find some poor bastards, I'm actually looking out for my people when they need me. Daniel might want to take notes. The potentate is very busy right now, Spectre said through gritted teeth. I'm sure he is, Phoebe replied coolly. Well, in any case, I hope you'll catch them soon. Always worrying when convicts and such like are unchecked, isn't it? Spectre glared at her. It certainly is. Oh, and one more thing. Phoebe leaned forward. When you've caught them, please do pass on my good wishes to Daniel about the baby. It seems his practice has paid off at last. All the blood drained from Spectre's face. She opened her mouth to speak, but then a loud clatter suddenly split the air. Screams and metallic gracing rang in Julian's ears. What was that? He cried. Aunt Bridget shook her head. I don't know. Spectre sprinted away, towards the noise. In moments the street was empty, and Phoebe slammed the door shut. She drew the bolt across with a sigh. Well, that was a bit of a nightmare, she muttered, and wrenched the shawl from around her neck. What's going on? Aunt Bridget asked. I heard her talking to you, so I thought I'd come to the rescue, said Phoebe. Bloody dreadful woman. I'd ban her from coming into Faunatown if I could. Julian frowned. You know who those criminals are, don't you? Phoebe twitched her nose. They're not criminals. Come with me and keep your voices down. Julian shot a confused glance at Aunt Bridget, but she looked just as perplexed as him. Neither spoke as Phoebe led them up several flights of stairs, then pulled open a door disguised in a wall panel, an entrance to the old servants' quarters. Behind it was another tiny staircase, white with dust. But even in the low light, Julian noticed footprints. At the top was a cramped attic, piled to the rafters with boxes and musty furnishings. A small shaft of sunlight pooled through a window in the roof, and sitting under it were 4 figures, 3 men and a child. She's gone, Phoebe said. It should be safe, for now. And look who's here, just like I told you. The youngest man leaned forward, and Julian almost fell over in alarm. It wasn't a man at all. Charlotte! He gasped. She tried to smile, but it came out more as a grimace. She seemed like a completely different person. It went beyond her short hair and grubby clothes. Her expression was tighter, her skin paler. She even held herself oddly, as though she had been punched in the chest. Hello, Julian, she said. Julian didn't speak. He just stared at her for a moment, then ran towards her and pulled her into a hug. Okay, Bassies, so that was chapter 3 of volume 2 of Run Like Clockwork. So jumping ahead in the story ever so slightly there, just to give you a little bit of a taster for what is to come. If you would like to hear me reading chapter 1, then head along to the live stream which I did on the release, not the release day, the cover reveal day, because that was when I originally read chapter 1. But all the same, I really hope that you guys will enjoy the rest of the story when you read it. Don't forget that this is volume 2. Volume 1 is already out, and you really do need to read volume 1 before you read volume 2. There is a lot going on in this story across both of the novels, and a lot of plot threads to keep track of, a lot of characters to keep track of. It will only really make sense if you read the 2 books back to back. So just throwing that out there. So what I'm going to do now is just tell you guys a little bit about the background to this story, and just some behind the scenes trivia and stuff that I think you might quite enjoy. If you've got any questions about anything, as I've mentioned, drop them in the chat. I'm going to keep glancing down here, so I'm making sure that I don't miss any of them. So basically, just to give you guys a little bit of context for this story. So Run Like Clockwork was originally conceived about 12 years ago, and it all happened when I was at university and I was in my final year of studying animal behaviour. And as part of that, we did a module which was all about ethics and animal welfare and stuff. But before we could get into studying animal welfare and everything that pertains to the modern way of doing things with animals and their protection, we had to look at the history. But obviously, animal welfare didn't start as animal welfare. It grew out of other welfare things which came before it, such as early feminism and human rights, and then eventually that led to animal rights. So we did a lot about that and the history of ethics, history of animal testing and stuff, which was really grim. And one of the names that came up in the discussion was a guy called René Descartes. And he was a French philosopher who lived in the 1600s. And he is most famous for coining the phrase cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. But in the same treatise that he explained that, he basically came up with this idea. He put forward this philosophical theory that animals were fundamentally different from humans because they had no souls. And so that meant that basically they could be mistreated with impunity in the name of scientific advancement or whatever people wanted, because when they screamed, or whenever there was any painful vocalizations, as it were, it's because the animals themselves were not self-aware enough to be in pain in the same way that a human would be. It was simply, and I'm more or less quoting here, the grinding of the inner clockwork not working anymore, which obviously horrified me and practically everyone else in the class. We really, really did not like Descartes at all. But all the same, that sort of mentality and that imagery of a clockwork animal really stuck in my brain. And we were also encouraged in that same lecture, that same module, to basically think about things like the greater good and all of these really philosophical and ethical questions. If you were in this position, what would you do? And all of this stuff. So it got really intense really quickly and really up there. But I love being challenged like that, and I love sort of thinking about all of these different things and trying to make sense of them in my way. Now, it sort of sat in my head like that for a while, and then a couple of years later, I wrote the first version of Run Like Clockwork. And it's very strange because it started off as a short story. This massive thing originally was a short story. Who would believe it? And it was a little bit different. On the surface, it was very similar. We had the City of Forest, we had Leo, we had Charlotte, and we had Malcolm, and they were the only characters who existed in the original draft. But Leo was the only one whose name has remained unchanged right through, because originally Charlotte was called Carla, and Malcolm was actually called Philip, but I changed them round. I changed them specifically so that there wouldn't be any phonetic confusion later down the line with Daniel Carter and Phoebe. I didn't want to have Philip and Phoebe, and I didn't want to have Carla and Carter. It just sounded a bit too similar for my liking, so I changed them round. And that original short story, the bare bones of it still exist within the story, specifically in volume 2. I'm not going to say exactly which bit it is because I don't want to ruin anything, but I will just say that it is a key scene involving the tower. And when you read volume 2, you will probably pick up on that scene exactly when you see it. And then basically I wrote Run Like Clockwork as this short story, and then I expanded it into a slightly bigger story, which then became bigger again and bigger again. And then originally I wrote it as a single novel. Then I split it into 2. Then it went back into 1 novel, and then I split it into 2 again. It was all over the place. But it needed to be all over the place because it's a massive story, and there is so many plates that I needed to spin and threads that I needed to keep track of. And it was a very messy birth for this story. But as I say, I think it needed that. It needed that messiness and that grittiness because that needed to come into the story. It's a very dark story, and it's got a kind of desperation about it in a sense. And I really feel like it needed to jump through all those hoops in order for that to come across in the writing as well. So I originally started pitching this novel to literary agents a few years ago, and they all rejected it, as they have for all of my books. But I wasn't swayed. I knew that this was hopefully going to be a story that a lot of people would enjoy, and I didn't want to keep that from them. So originally I wrote what is now the final version of Run Like Clockwork, the one that's been published. I originally wrote that just before I wrote the Foxfires trilogy. And I always intended that Run Like Clockwork would come out before the Foxfires trilogy. But then I decided to switch them around a little bit because I was determined that the Foxfires trilogy, all 3 books, would come out in 2020. That was a real thing that I wanted to do. So Run Like Clockwork got pushed back, and I kind of felt like this year was the perfect year to do it because it's my 10th anniversary year as an author. It is the 10th anniversary of when I started writing the story. So it's really come full circle. And also, volume 2 is technically my 10th novel. Like I said, I know that volume 1 and volume 2 are the same story, but volume 2, they're still separate novels. So volume 2 technically is my 10th novel in my 10th anniversary year, 10 years after the story was first written. So it's really a full circle kind of story for me. So so there's that. As for the rest of the story, so Rene Descartes was a massive influence, for better or for worse. Now, when you read Run Like Clockwork, you'll probably notice, especially if you've read volume 1 already, that it's split into parts. There's 2 books, and each book is split into 2 parts, so corresponding with 4. At the start of each one, there is a epigraph, which so it looks really, really like up there. And that's actually a transcription from Discourse on the Method, which Rene Descartes wrote. And that's a transcription of the argument that he put forward that I explained just before. So there's that little nod to it. And Daniel Carter, the potentate of Forest, his name was specifically chosen to share a phonetic similarity with Descartes. Daniel Carter, Rene Descartes. Also, another little note in regards to Daniel's name. The name Daniel literally means God is my judge. And it just goes to show within the story that even though he is the most powerful man in the city, he isn't really. The keeper is still above him. Is still literally and figuratively above him. By contrast, we've got his wife Elizabeth, and her name means God is my oath. And that's going to tie in a little bit more to the story. But again, I'm not giving anything away. as with many things that I write, a lot of things have symbolism and layers behind them, and you don't need to know them in order to enjoy the story. You know, the guy could just be called Daniel and she could just be called Elizabeth. But if you dig a little bit deeper, you see all of these layers, and I'd like to think that that adds to the reading experience in its own special way. So as I mentioned, yeah, we've got the 4-story part. I'll also lead on from that and give you another little tidbit. So within the story, we've got alchemists, and they're slightly different from the historical alchemists, but there's also several areas where they are sort of similar, and that's really going to be noticeable in volume 2. But basically, historically, alchemists were primarily concerned with the discovery of the Philosopher's Stone and the elixir of life. And the Philosopher's Stone was said to produce the elixir of life, so it was a part and parcel thing. And an alchemist who was endeavouring to create the Philosopher's Stone and discover it, they would write down their journey and their findings in this book, which they would call the magnum opus, the great work. And that's where we get, obviously, the term magnum opus from. But historically, the historic magnum opus would be written in 4 sections, and each one of those sections would correspond to the stages that the Philosopher's Stone was said to go through before it became its final form. And they were all named after the colours that the stone was meant to take. And all of these colours had symbolism and stuff. And those names, those from the magnum opus and those colours are actually what split up Run Like Clockwork as well. So we've got part 1, Albedo, we've got part 2, Albedo, we've got part 3, Citrinitas, and then we've got part 4, Rubedo. And those translate sort of literally, I suppose, into chaos, wholeness, understanding, chaos, purification, wholeness, and I'm getting it all wrong. Chaos, purification, understanding, and wholeness. That's it. And when you read the story, you'll actually realize that each of those words summarize each of those 4 parts. So it's all very, very symbolic. But there's loads of stuff like that that's going on in the background of this story. And there's loads of other influences as well. We've got a lot of Victor Hugo in there, Les Miserables, which I'm going to be watching tonight as a sort of celebratory thing, and Hunchback of Notre Dame, very heavy influence there. We've also got a lot of Orwellian influence, a lot of 1984, and we've got some Alan Moore as well, Watchmen, and V for Vendetta, and all of these good stories, and they were all really influential on the story. Going back into the philosophers, we've also got Rene Descartes, we've got Jeremy Bentham, we've got Mary Wollstonecraft, the mother of Mary Shelley, and William Godwin, her father. So many different places where the inspiration just trickled down over years and years and years to create the story that exists today. And I'm just so happy that I can share it with you guys now. It's so odd to think that it's that's it now. You know, 10 years of my life, like a third of my life, has been dedicated in some form or another to this story, and now it's out there for you guys to enjoy. It's not just locked in here anymore, it's out there, and you guys can enjoy it, and I'm so happy and blessed to be able to share that with you. But I deliberately saved this for the end. Is it the end? Is it indeed? So I'm not going to give away too much at this stage, but let's just say that these 2 novels are not going to be the only time that we venture into the City of Forest. There will be other installments coming in this series. I can't leave it behind that easily. So basically, I'm not, like I say, I'm not going to say exactly what that's going to entail. I know, but I'm going to leave it for you guys so you've got something to look forward to. But the advent of the new ventures into the city will hopefully be beginning soon. So yes, it is going to be sort of like the Tragic Silence series, where there's going to be other installments, but there's not going to be as many as in the Tragic Silence series. So that one has, I think, 15 short stories plus the 3 novels. I'm not doing that. The main story will remain the first 2 novels, but on the side we will also have a couple of other little things, and I'm probably not going to release any of them next year, because next year is going to be full of Tragic Silence stuff. It's the 10th anniversary year of Tragic Silence next year, so we will have a few more of the short stories to come out. So, and then they will all wrap up. That we're near the end of the Darkest Dream stories, and to celebrate towards the end of the year, there's going to be something pretty special coming to celebrate 10 years. So the return to the City of Forest is in all likelihood going to be in 2024, but I'm going to keep you guys on that as and when I can. There's a lot of fun things that are coming ahead in the future. Enough to see us through for the next few years, and I really hope that you guys will stick with me as we go forward into that. And I'm so excited to share with you everything that's coming. We also have a new series which is coming as soon as I can get all of the books written, and that is the Nightland Quartet. And I am so freaking excited about that one. Series of 4 books. The first one is called The Shade Between Shadows, and the second, which I'm currently near the end of writing, is The Road Through Night. And the two, and there's going to be 2 more, which I'm going to be writing next year. Just to mention quickly about all of my writing stuff, if any of you guys would like to follow my writing journeys and creative processes and stuff closer than you can anywhere else, every single Wednesday on my Patreon, I have the Writing Desk Diary feature, and that basically gives you an in-depth glimpse into whatever I'm currently working on at that point. So at the moment, it's The Road Through Night. So if you're interested, Patreon, it's over there if you would like to join me there. But as for Run Like Clockwork, I'll just mention a couple of last few things before I wrap up the stream. So as with many of my books, there is a lot of behind the scenes trivia and goodies and stuff on my website. Excuse me, on my website. So both of the novels have their own playlists, their own soundtracks, which you can listen to on Spotify, and they are also on the website as well, because there's a couple of songs for some reason which I haven't been able to add to the Spotify playlist, so you can listen to those separately if you wish. We've also got all of the behind the scenes trivia, all multiple layers like I touched on before, which go into character names and little tidbits to history and other works of literature. So if you're interested in uncovering all of the Easter eggs and all of the trivia, that's all there in one handy place so you can see it. But be warned, that place is full of spoilers, so I'd recommend reading the book first. I also would like to say as well that I really hope that you'll enjoy the story. If you do, if you could please leave it a little review on Amazon for me, that would mean the absolute world to me, because not only do those reviews tell me how much you enjoyed the story, but it also tells Amazon's algorithm to recommend the book to other people who might also enjoy it. It really helps indie authors like myself when these reviews come in. It helps us so much. So please leave your reviews, share them around, share them with me, share the book, and every single review that I see that comes up on my Amazon author page will get shared on my social media as well. So yeah, please leave me a review. But with all that being said, I am going to leave you now, because more Emma talking time means less reading time. So thank you so much again, everybody, for your amazing support, not just with this, but for the last 10 years. If you joined me 10 days ago or 10 years ago, it doesn't matter. I love you all equally. Thank you so much for all of your support, for everything that you do, everything that you allow me to do, and just for making the Bassey Brigade such a beautiful, lovely place for readers, for everybody, just for us all to come together in our own unique little weirdness and and love books together. So again, thank you from the absolute bottom of my heart for everything you've done, everything that you continue to do, and I really hope that you'll enjoy Run Like Clockwork Volume 2, also Volume 1 if you've yet to read it. Also, last couple of notices. On the 5th of November, I am going to be having the soft launch for Volume 2 and a signing at Susie K at the Secret Garden in Chester. It would be amazing to see you there. So if you're around the Northwest area on the Saturday, the 5th of November, please do come and find me there. The week after that, I'm going to be at the Wirral Pathways Festival with all of my books, and I'm also going to be doing giving a presentation on the origins of fairy tales. So if you're a fan of the Truth Behind the Tale series, that's not to be missed. Please do come down and say hello. And the weekend after that, 3 consecutive weekends, it's one of the biggest events on my calendar. It's Liverpool Comic Con, and that Comic Con is going to be an extremely special one, because the Saturday, the 19th of November, is the exact day that Blindsighted Wanderer was first published 10 years ago. So in honour of that, I will be appearing as Merrin, as I did at the legendary Llangollen Fairy Festival. And the next day, the 20th, is the 9th anniversary of Tragic Silence. So it's a very big weekend, and I'm really hoping that I'll see a lot of you guys there. I can't wait to see you all at all of these events. But if it's Run Like Clockwork that you're after specifically, Susie K, please... Susie K, please do come down there and see me. Everyone who has pre-ordered Run Like Clockwork Volume 2, rest assured the books are on their way to me as we speak. The paperbacks will hopefully be with me in about a week, and as soon as I have them, I'm going to be signing them and sending them off to everyone who pre-ordered a paperback copy. And it will also include a special brand new bookmark for both Volume 1 and 2, with both the covers next to each other for the very first time. So I hope that you guys will enjoy the book, and I hope that you all have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. I know the stream's been going on for the better part of an hour, so I won't keep you any longer. But thank you honestly so much. I really hope you enjoyed the little reading. Head on over to the website for all the information to be just in one handy little place. Hopefully I will see you at on the road in the next couple of weeks throughout November. All of the information for all of those events is on the website, so keep an eye out for them on there. So with that being said, my beloved Bassies, thank you so much for joining me tonight. Have a lovely evening, and I will see you very soon. Happy reading. Mwah. Bye everyone.